Now, some feel that expansion of the BRICS membership will boost its power and lessen the dominance of the US dollar. Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Iran, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates and Argentina have been admitted as new members of the bloc. And as the 15th BRICS Summit came to a close yesterday, there were promises of stronger commercial connections and increased support for each other's economies. But can BRICS usher forth a new global order? To discuss this further, I am joined by a specialist in global geopolitics, international cooperation and multilateralism at Wits University. That's Patrick Lugusa Kadima. Thank you very much, Patrick, for coming in once again for us to discuss the importance of this. What is the significance of these six nations joining? I mean, for me, I noticed that at least 4 of these new nations, besides Russia, are, among the richest countries with oil.
Yeah, thank you, Masero, and good afternoon to your viewers. So, indeed, six countries have been added to the bloc, and this brings in, a new dynamic inside the BRICS forum or member states. As you have mentioned and as you've highlighted, is the, some of these are oil-producing countries and, produce oil in large quantities. And therefore, this will bring in, a lot of cooperation between these new members and the old members that are there, I mean, if one had when the heads of states were giving their closing statements yesterday in the summit, they all emphasized this thing of inclusive multilateralism, And I don't think it's going to end with these 6 countries. There will be more talks in the next BRICS Summit in Russia next year, probably to expand, And one thing, as we've seen, is that one could indicate as to who was backing who, in terms of the addition. In terms of adding which member state, as we've seen, South Africa was expressly said Africa will remain on top of its agenda, and we've seen Ethiopia and Egypt coming in, key role players in this continent. Ethiopia stating that it will strive to become the connectivity hub for Africa, and bridging it with the East. And so we have seen that, and we have seen also, Argentina joining in, Brazil, of course, behind that, and going later into the year, Argentina goes to elections with a right-wing leader, apparently leading in the polls. And this will shape dynamics. We'll have to wait and see what will happen, if he wins those elections in Argentina.
I think the other issue with, bringing in Africa, which is a win for us in terms of Ethiopia and geographically, of course, Egypt. When it comes to Ethiopia, the Horn of Africa, it's very prone to conflict. Is that going to, like you're saying, in terms of Argentina and Brazil supporting that, when it comes to a country such as the Horn of Africa, what do we do with the fact that it's very prone to conflict, especially between the Middle East and the West?
Yeah, very true. It's Ethiopia is prone to conflict. You have said it, and I mean, those are some of the issues they did mention at the end, where they said that security remains a concern for the BRICS countries. They will strive to have different forums where they try to solve issues, in terms of conflict, and they did in fact stress that they believe and continue to have firm belief in the United Nations in playing a central role in terms of international peace and security, but at the same time, fearlessly, they did state that it is in need of reforms, and the world cannot continue to go as it's going currently, and that there is a need for countries in the global south to play or to have a seat in these multilateral institutions, So there is emphasis there on security, and it was very strong, and I think the addition of the addition of Ethiopia, despite the conflict, in the Horn of Africa, will still be beneficial, for the rest of Africa.
Market.
Yes, indeed, an emerging market and one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. But we cannot deny the fact that conflict sometimes can slow this economic growth,
Just tell me about the negatives. I mean, I'm thinking some policies with some countries when when it comes, because if you look at it, there's some who will argue that the addition of the BRICS Plus or the expansion of BRICS is looking to be very Middle East centric. A lot of people would argue that, right? But talk to me about some of the policies that might change, especially economic policies with some of these nations in BRICS. I mean, for instance, China playing a role that the US would ordinarily play when Saudi Arabia and Iran were fighting. So that also already told us that there's some friendships that will form with those three nations. But policies that have to change now?
Yes, indeed, there will be policy changes. In the outcomes that the declaration that was passed yesterday, one of those things was they have tasked their finance ministers and or governors, you know, as they state in that document, to start speaking about the use of a local currency, use of local currencies, you know, the use of probably a common currency, you know, so on and so forth. So they should report. They should have a report by next year's summit in Russia, and that's what they need to before they pass a resolution on that. So policies are going to change. One other thing I believe that was missed out, you know, in this declaration was the issue of migration. Migration has become a very big issue around the world. It is transboundary, but there was no sign of the BRICS countries coming in to try to solve the issue of migration that we see that the West European countries are facing currently, and that leaves a lot to be desired, I mean, in terms of BRICS, because it affects them. It affects the BRICS countries one way or another. And unfortunately, it was not on top of the agenda. Probably next year we can only hope that it is there. I mean, another policy that might change or come into perspective is the issue of trading, you know, in terms of issues of food that was highlighted, food security. They did mention that the BRICS countries produce about a third of the world's food, and that they will continue cooperating in terms of how to trade, you know, and trying to curb food insecurity.
Just tell me something, Mr. Kadima. You know, you speak about migration, for instance, which was an issue that we're none the wiser on when it comes to that. We also don't know what kind of criteria was used to accept these 6 nations out of 23 that formally applied and 40 that said they want to, right? We don't know the criteria, we don't know about migration, but what's also important is that polarization was there prior to the World War, right? And there were some who were saying that we should be careful, or BRICS should be careful in terms of expansion because of what happened then. Because now people could not decide which currency should be used, there was a lot of fighting, etc. That's also something we're none the wiser on in terms of policy around that. How are they going to mitigate that from happening again? So
the first thing I just want to mention is that in terms of the criteria, they did mention it was consensus. What is consensus? One does not know what consensus they used behind the closed doors.
It's very wide.
Yeah, it's very wide and open for interpretation. And I just believe that, you know, in the next summit, they probably need to develop a framework that is very clear, that is transparent, that is open on how to admit, you know, and who to admit and what are the criteria, you know, because consensus also, if it is a criteria that will be used for resolutions, it's going to give a major problem to this bloc of countries. You know, they would rather move to a majority vote system, you know, than rather hide under consensus. But one understands that, you know, there is a need that, you know, there's a need for more expansion in terms of BRICS, you know, but it needs to be transparent, because they did in fact say that they are just there to, you know, develop and have, you know, economic cooperation and cooperation between South to South countries.
All right, thank you so much for your expertise and for telling us exactly what you think in terms of what this means in future for countries that are part of BRICS. That was Mr. Kadima from the University of the Witwatersrand. He is a specialist in global and geopolitics.